Morning, everyone. We will now resume proceedings in Finance Committee. But before we do, I'll ask Mr. Mark Taggart if he would please lead us in prayer.
Thanks. Morning, colleagues. Let's pray. Father, we give you thanks for this day, knowing that you have created it for our benefit. And Father, I pray that we will rejoice in it. Father, as we gather here this morning to be about the taking care of the business of the country, and in particular with approving a budget for the upcoming fiscal year, we pray for wisdom, we pray for knowledge, and we pray for understanding as we deliberate the various spending heads and try to understand and to do the right things. I pray, Father, that all things we say and do today will be done decently and in order, with respect and care for each other. Would you bless our deliberations? May they prove fruitful. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Mark Taggart. Please be seated. This morning, we will be considering the appropriations to the Minister for Finance and Economic Development. But before we do that, I've been asked by the Leader of the Opposition if he could make a statement of clarification as it relates to the term, the Queen's bottom. He would like to clarify that comment and statement, and I have agreed to give him a few minutes to do so. Mr. Bush.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I shall be brief. Mr. Chairman, I made a remark here on the discussions on the Cayman marinas, which became, as usual, a very distorted discussion on CNS, being so because of the dirty way the report carried the discussion, even to distorting and misrepresenting photos. The usual way on that scandal sheet showing the usual bias and hatred was exhibited about the discussion here. Mr. Chairman, my reference to the Queen's bottom being dredged is the correct reference to the ocean bottom, the bottom of the sea. For as long as I know discussion on dredging in government, that has been the terminology, the Queen's bottom. The sea belongs to the government, being the crown, like all other government properties, but referred to as the Queen's bottom, especially when the ocean bottom is dredged. While I'm not a colonialist, and I can prize myself on being a sensible nationalist, Mr. Chairman, I have never, will never make any disparaging remarks about Her Majesty the Queen. I have found her to be a gentle lady, a very pleasant person to talk to, one who is very appreciative of the people of these islands, and she is most protective of the Commonwealth. And I have to say, I have always been a loyalist when it comes to her, with much distaste for the various FCO governance models who the Cayman Islands is taken sometimes as pawns and used as pawns on their chessboards. However, the distortions on CNS, Mr. Chairman, while accusing me, have every possibility to be what they are because of the contamination of the lead writer, and in that is a rabid socialist, anti-loyalist, and God only knows what the owners are. Now they will believe I have no right to explain or defend myself, or even that I have no recourse to their dingy, clouded, despicable, foul, misleading, arrogant, and bad disposition. But as a member of this honorable House, I think we ought to all realize I do have a recourse, and I remind them of standing orders and the privileges and immunities law that provides members of this honorable House and gives guidance to which reporters, if that is what they are, must adhere to. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Without further delay, we will now proceed to consider the appropriations to the Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, up until now and in the last year, you have been fair, honest, open, and transparent. And I do know, having been the finance minister, that you're doing a good job in trying to keep the finances on an even keel. So we on this side have agreed not to question your ministry and to vote in block for all heads, but for a question one member have on Sinoco. So, Mr. Chairman, we would like to take the vote in block on all heads except for the one on Sinoco. That's because you have been fair, honest, open, transparent, and have been as decent as you can as a chairman, given the circumstances.
Mr. Chairman, don't feel washed away. For the record, and I know Mr. Tibbetts is here, I know my colleague from East End is here, there were times when, as a Minister of Health, I had that luxury because of the trust and belief that they had in me.
Yes.
Well done and well earned.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, as a former minister of this country, there were times when the opposition, who the leader of the opposition was then a part of, I was given such privilege too. It has to do with hard work, straightforwardness, honesty, and belief in your abilities to do the job and get it done. The country is also speaking about that. I believe hard work is always, always rewarded.
And
Thank you for your stewardship.
And it's done being completely politically unbiased.
It's not often that I'm speechless, but
We do say anything, just take the vote now, my son.
I want to say, first, I would like to say thank you all very much for the vote of confidence. And I would also like to say many thanks to the staff in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development and the various departments that come under the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. And I just want to say this compliment that's paid to me, I extend to you. Thank you all very much.
Mr. Chairman, that goes without saying. We couldn't say that to you unless you had a hard-working staff. And that what we have done here, sir, is certainly extended and implicit with them or to them.
Okay, without further delay, we will proceed to take the vote on the various appropriations except for the appropriation CIN 1, CIN 1. So we do have a quorum. So for the record, I will proceed to read the various appropriations. So all those in favor of FED 1, Policy Advice and Ministerial Services, $1,507,745. FED 2, Governance and Administrative Services, $237,464. Page 179 and 180. FED 3, Collection of Coercive Revenue, $2,492,288 on page 181. FED 4, Preparation and Publication of Statistical Reports, $1,452,382 on page 182. FED 5, financial reporting and management services, $3,643,711 on page 183. FED 6, processing and inspection of aircrafts, vessels, and cargo, $6,157,619 on page 184. FED 7, identification and investigation of customs offenses, $1,394,463 on page 185. FED 8, patrolling of coastal waters, $223,756 on page 186. FED 9, administration and processing of applications, $557,867 on page 187. FED 11, monitoring and reporting of the economy, $198,076 on page 188. TP 55, interest on loans, public servants, $1,500 on page 286. OE 9, Caribbean Economic Community, CARICOM fees, $168,000 on page 289. OE 27, past service pension liability payments, $11,400,000 on page 290. OE 54, Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, annual premium, $500,000 on page 290. OE 57, executive bank charges, $35,000 on page 290. OE 86, compensation, $402,000 on page 290. OE 87, default on Paloma Government Guaranteed Loan Scheme, $10,000 on page 290. OE 92, settlement of government guarantees, $937,100 on page 291. EI 70, Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, $1 million, page 294. LM 1, Civil Service Mortgage Loans, $75,000 on page 297. LM 3, Personnel Loans, $80,000, page 297. LM 4, Overseas Medical Advances, $250,000 on page 297. LM 11, Settlement Loans, $275,000 on page 297. Financing Expenses, FE 3, Interest on Public Debt, $28,524,495 on page 288. Standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no.
Aye.
Turning now to consider appropriation CIN 1, health insurance of seamen and veterans, $8,730,607 on page 189. Are there any questions? The staff for the Ministry of Finance and the various departments, you all are free to go. And thank you very much for attending this morning.
You understand why they beat me up so much this morning now?
Thank you all very much. Thank you. We will now consider the appropriation CIN-1 health insurance for seamen and veterans for $8,730,607 on page 189. Are there any questions? Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, and first of all, let me apologize for being the flying ointment, and I'm not suggesting that Cineco's performance is any less than those that have already left, but I think I need to give Cineco the opportunity to clear up some matters and explain some stuff to the public. So this $8 million, is this paid in a form of a premium and you spread the risk with other people, or is this basically a pay-through for these people from government?
Mr. Tibbetts, for the record, please state your full name and title first. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Lonnie Tibbetts, CEO and President of Cineco. With regards to the question, the premium that is calculated on CIN 1, the 8.73, is based on an enrollment capacity, a per member premium for all eligible seafarers and veterans and seamen and veterans of the Cayman Islands. The risk that Cineco undertakes is exclusively based on that for all on-island services, including the CIHSA as well as non-CIHSA providers locally. For overseas, that is provided through a separate output.
So that is the reason why, if you divide it through by the persons, the per person per month premium is substantially lower than what the government is paying for retired persons from the civil service, because that one covers both local and overseas.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Question on we were told by the staff of the HSA last week that it is normal. Well, let me back up a little bit. If indulge me a minute, Mr. Chairman, because I think I need to give him some background information. I FOI'd some information from the HSA concerning the treaties and the MRI that is supposed to be installed at the hospital eventually. And they supplied me with quite a volume of information, some 70 pages, I guess, assuming that I wouldn't dig up into it. And one of the questions I asked the CEO of the HSA was if it is normal for a CPT code, for instance, 73721 as a code, to be priced at $1381.27, which I have confirmed with the insurance commissioner is the correct price, but to be priced at other intervals during the period for which the information was provided to me, which was basically January to December 2013, the same CPT code, 73721, to be priced at twice the amount, $2,762.54. Is that a normal occurrence?
Through you, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Tibbetts?
Thank you. No, sir. Most, essentially CPT code that you've quoted is the use of an MRI machine, and it's a diagnostic test. In particular, the test is performed on for that particular example on a joint, and it's essentially without the contrast material. On most CPT codes related to MRI procedures, there are usually three components to each code. The first being the actual scanning, the magnetic resonance imaging. The second being the use of the chemical to provide enhance the contrast and particular diagnostic ability. And the third being the interpretation of the results. The accumulation of the three of those can produce different prices. However, the core price pretty much remains the same throughout the process. To see it increase to that magnitude usually is either an increase of a charge master or a fee, etc., for the code in particular. Sorry.
But in order to charge the variation even with the contrast, there would be a separate code. It would be 73721-26, for instance.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, sir, that is correct.
So it is entirely wrong to have the same exact CPT code quoted at different prices in the pay sheet. Given the minor variation about reading and stuff.
Through you, Mr. Chair. That is a possibility, sir. I am not certain if that was an error or if there was a change in the charge master rate, but in other words, there is, for it to be apples to apples, there is some significant change in the pricing for it to not be the same.
But certainly, if you were presented with this bill on one of your clients, you would want some serious explanation before you would settle the bill.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Most certainly, Mr. Miller. Okay. Yes, sir.
Well, it looks to me that these were paid right off the bat because the total is greater than about 1.3 million that was paid out in that period of time.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the MRI machine is that is deployed at the CIHSA is a joint, I think, partnership with the CIHSA and 3T Cayman. They have published for us a set of rates based on the standard health insurance fees approved by the Department of Health and Regulatory Services and Parliament. And the rates, if there is a variance in that rate, we certainly would quantify an explanation and rationale for that change.
The other justification that was given to going to this, to a treaty, was because other providers on the island only have a 0.3 or a 0.5. And one of the reasons given was that the quality that it was being obtained from the treaty was so bad. Have you had any reports from doctors or patients about such bad quality from the providers who use the 0.3 MRI?
Through you, Mr. Chair. If I may, I'd like to give a kind of brief explanation on the use of the machine and the resonance level. MRI machines are rated similar in the version of electricity, sort of 110, 220, etc., 240. MRI machines was invented by Dr. Tesla, utilized the science and the essence of it. And in recognition of his efforts, MRI machines are rated on a Tesla scale. The MRI machine that was deployed or has been deployed locally has been a 0.3. There were two of them, one at the Chrissy Tomlinson Memorial Hospital and the other at KY Imaging on West Bay Road. In addition to the Tesla rating, there's also the actual physical capacity of some of the machines. Some being the capacity to take the entire body inside of the machine, some having limited capacity, and there's issues regarding maybe claustrophobia, etc. Others regarding the actual physical size of the machine. The essence of all of the different variations are a commitment, one, to service, and then finally to the quality of the image. As the Tesla level increases from 0.3, 0.5, 1.5 to the contracted 3.0, which is, it's now been surpassed, but at the time, I think, of the contracting, it was very much near the state-of-the-art or the top level at that time. There are concerns mostly regarding, and most of my complaints that I have heard have been from neurologists and some cardiologists regarding the image capacity of a 0.3, a 0.5, 1.5, etc., and there's variances in there. The quintessential concern mostly is that the services available locally in comparison to the machine, to utilize a full 3.0 Tesla machine to its fullest capacity, whilst giving greater resolution, the mass majority of diagnostics can be achieved without that level of resonance. Therefore, depending on the particular test that has been administered or the diagnostics results that they're seeking from an MRI, 0.3s can produce lower quality work for some neurological testing as opposed to 3.0. So we have had a mixed result, sir, in regards to concerns with imaging. One of the concerns that we've had has been predominantly some of the neurologists have complained with the 0.3s, but we have to be cognizant for a long time it was what we had as the standard or what was available here, and it served very well in preliminary diagnostics. What would occur most times was once it got to an interventional phase, the neurosurgeon, for example, or cardiologist, if they had an issue, would possibly repeat the test overseas when they perform the interventional care. What we're, very keen and eager to see is with the 1.5 and the 3.0, that usually is the 3.0 usually exceeds most hospitals in the U.S. now. The 3.0 is a very high quality machine. The 1.5 seems to be pretty much standard across the board. However, a lot of the organizations are moving to a 3.0 machine. The concerns that we've had with the costing of it is there's been a debate regarding the price of the actual test in comparison to the quality of the machine. That argument has failed. The CPT code achieves a Medicare-based rate or a charge master rate or a remittance rate standardized across the board, irrespective of the resonance capacity of the machine or the Tesla rating.
Would you agree that most of the issues that have occurred, while some of them have been on the quality of the image, there has been greater concern on the quality of the interpretation of the image, and that up until this point, the 3.0 is not operating. The one they've been using for all of the numbers that they gave me is the 1.5 in the trailer outside, because the 3.0 contractually was supposed to be installed from September last year, but it has not yet been operational. But have you had any complaints from physicians and patients of the quality and the accuracy of the interpretation of the image?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We've had some concerns expressed with, I think, timeliness, and I think, again, the radiologist plays a significant role, as they are the specialists and the physicians that specifically interpret the images and identify any malnormalities that require further, investigation. From time to time, we've had concerns regarding the timeliness of reporting, and I think that's basically a vendor issue. And again, it's pretty much of a subjective nature. Some physicians prefer a report that looks one way or says one thing, whilst others have. But it really is on an individual, personal basis in regards to the concerns with the interpretation of the diagnosis.
How does the prices that you are getting with the 3T company and the hospital combined compare to what's available to you regionally?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We have had, I've expressed some concerns regarding the current pricing. The concerns that we've had is, as we can appreciate in the use of technology and different equipment, there continues to be, in correlation to the age of a piece of equipment as well as its availability. MRIs are no different. They are the diagnostic testing and pricings. They are equally susceptible to a decline in value and more affordability or decline in costs, and more affordability as more and more machines are produced and more utilized. In our kind of arrangement or working with the HSA when the contract was awarded to 3T Cayman, we received a report from Jamaica regarding an equivalent level machine, 1.5 Tesla, a GE machine as well, so a very identical brand, so to speak, maybe a slight model difference. And I had not seen a machine or specifically. However, members that we've sent to Jamaica have utilized the services of the vendor. When compared to the prices that we received here, they were just around a third of the same identical cost. And as we can appreciate, volume profit analysis in all businesses is a factor in that, as well as the cost of living locally and other insurance as well. But I did express my concerns to the health insurance commissioner, who at the time was completing a actuarial analysis of his standard health insurance fees, which is what is utilized predominantly by providers and service providers locally, that we felt from the results of this inquiry and kind of probing regionally, as well as South Florida market, we looked at what we consider outpatient procedures, that the shift fees on the MRIs needed to be examined significantly very probable for a reduction in pricing because of our results. At those, apples to apples, it was, we are cognizant of different environments and economies of scale, but we felt that the fees may needed to be looked at somewhat better for true cost.
Based on comments made during the budget address and by the Minister of Health and others about Health City, I took the time to go on their website and I downloaded some of their case rates and some of the other prices. Unfortunately, they don't use the CPT code on their website. They have their own code structure that they use, so it's difficult to compare.
Yes, sir.
But for instance, a cardiac defibrillator implant without cardiac catheter is $68,000. A pre-cardiovascular pacemaker implant with MCC is $39,000, and drug-eluting stent is $35,500. Have you been, based on comments that I heard the government say, have you been presented with these kind of case rates from Health City, and how do they compare to what you are currently paying now on overseas agreements?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, sir. We are currently in negotiations with Health City, Cayman Islands right now regarding access and discount pricing and use of their facilities. I just wanted to let the public also know that Cineco is welcomed at Health City. We've sent 11 members to date to the facility for services, and we continue to utilize their services. In January of this year, I received an initial offer of prices, and I believe what you received from them was what's called or what you may have seen on their website, because I've seen the actual the pricing structure as well. Most times they've utilized the standard health insurance fees for most of their procedures, CPT code based. But our standard health insurance fees does not utilize diagnostics rating capacity, traditionally used, known as DRGs, which is a culmination of CPT codes, prices, services, HICPIC codes, hospital stay, and other procedures and materials utilized. They're quite unique in that they are what we consider one-stop shop pricing. This is usually utilized by some large organizations, contracts, for example, that'll say if a member or your patient or your member is diagnosed with this, based on this, we will perform this procedure for this price. It's all inclusive, and it's been utilized to a certain extent in the U.S. primarily for Medicare pricing for fixed contracts with providers. For most of our services in the U.S., traditionally, Seneco paid on an alternative basis called fee for service, whereby we paid on an individual basis each service or each item used, each day, etc. And very rarely did we do what's called, traditionally also called from a DRG or a case-based rate on some items. What this opportunity that they presented to us is really a case-based rate for a number of services. Prior to a year or two ago, we contracted with St. Luke's and we subsequently renewed that contract last year. They presented to us case-based rates on specific procedures. In addition, we have been solicited a number of times by Tenet Health Organization in South Florida that also presented us DRG prices as well. And in comparison to those, they seem to be pretty comparable to a certain extent, where the prices on what we consider the charge master seems to be pretty normal around the region and South Florida area. As we can appreciate, the St. Luke's contract from Kansas City is has a better deal to a certain extent, gives us some more capacity in there. However, their listing isn't as robust with us at this time. I suspect if we presented an opportunity for them to give us an entire gamut of DRG prices, they obviously would. However, the St. Luke's contract gave us a unique opportunity whereby they waived the 10% for the seafarers. So we actually got an additional 10% off of those, as well as the indigent indigent group for which we manage their care as well. In comparing both of those, on the surface, both seem pretty near, and with the discount that HCCI has proposed, there is some value and comparability to a certain extent. But we are still in negotiations.
Yeah, but if you had to put a figure on it as a percentage-wise of how much more Health City was than what you're paying St. Luke, 10, 15, 20%?
One moment. From their base charge master, and I'm just examining probably four of these actual, through you, Mr. Chair, my apologies. From their charge master, the St. Luke's contract in comparison to essentially apples to apples has a two-day less stay compared to the Health City proposed, and based on this price, the Health City is just a little over 10% more than what the St. Luke's contract proposed.
And you say you're still in negotiations?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, sir, we are.
Given the fact that the government gave Health City so much concessions, and the way their PR, that they were going to be so much cheaper than the U.S. market, I hope that you get the support from the Ministry of Health to try and drive those prices down, because, again, under our environment, Health City is not paying a lot of fixed costs, particularly in professional insurance and some of the other stuff, and some of the stuff that they've been exempted from locally, that St. Luke's would have to pay in its environment. So I'm asking you to make your best effort to get those prices down to where they are, as promised. They will be substantially cheaper, not minuscule more than what we currently pay.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Miller, we are currently actively involved in the negotiations with the Health City professionals, and we are planning, I think, in the at the conclusion of this with the Honorable Minister for Finance and the Honorable Minister for Health to examine this as part of our a retreat that I think we're trying to schedule shortly, to look at, really get apples to apples and see exactly where we are. In addition to this, we also have to be cognizant that the current gamut of services for which they will provide to us ranges about 90 to 95% of what we would traditionally send overseas, with possibly a minor reduction based on just preliminary diagnostics and follow-up, so to speak. So the health city serves a great purpose in retaining our cardiovascular care here, and achieving a very good volume of our business. Why I've emphasized that is that if we presented an RFP to a U.S. provider or any provider to exclusively achieve 90% of our cardiovascular cases, in that apples to apples arrangement, yes, we would certainly expect a better discount than what was presented initially.
Is there any plans to do that? Because that is exactly what I did in 1989 with the Cleveland Clinic. And when I left government in 92, we were negotiating. HMOs had just come out then. And we were negotiating with the Cleveland Clinic the possibility of taking all of the tertiary care for the Cayman Islands. Granted, I know that things have progressed in cost since that. At that time, they wanted, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, $2.3 million. And I was prepared to pay them 1.9 based on 3 years' history of charges for what we had done with them. So I believe that if you're going to commit to a single institution for that volume of business, you should be looking for, I mean, serious reduction in prices in the magnitude of 40, 45 to 50%, or thereabouts, because that's the kind of room that exists, as you know, within rack rates in the industry, and particularly if here in the local market, where you could guarantee them 30-day payment as opposed to 120-day payment or 90-day payment, you can probably bring it down to 30% of rack rates. So negotiate hard, because looking at other prices, for instance, a VDRL is $75 there and $47 in the other providers, and a lipid protein thing is $75 from them and $65 by other local providers who have not gotten the concessions that these people have gotten in lowering their standards for their professional qualifications, et cetera, which should lead to cheaper prices because they're able to recruit people from a market that other Caymaners can't recruit people from for cheaper labor. So thank you very much, and I wish you well. Any support I can offer you, I'm willing to assist you in getting the best possible deal for Cineco, for the country.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Bush?
is the director saying that the cost to send the patient overseas 10% more than they would get it at Health City?
Or the other way around,
10% more
more or less.
to go overseas?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The prices that were presented to us on their charge master on the pure sheet without any discounts was around 10% on some items more here than was overseas.
10% more.
Yes, sir. And
But you, that was before they agreed 25% or 20%, whatever it is, that the Caymanians will get if they go there?
yes, sir. Through
That's
you.
before.
Yes, sir. Through you, Mr.
So the 20% will be a reduction.
Yes, sir. So
And
essentially,
and your costs, not including what it costs the patient, because you don't supply all the costs for the patient. I mean, that it costs a person to go overseas. You're not paying for the person that go with the person, for instance. You don't pay for plane ticket, that sort of thing. That's the
True.
cost of the patient.
through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, sir, we do. So we do cover the all-inclusive costs would include the airfare if they require an escort, and any subsequent accommodation requiring post-op, out-of-hospital care, etc., outpatient treatment. So yes, there is value in the prices to remain at Health City, Cayman, as proposed. With their proposed initial discount of 20%, it does make it more attractive to a certain extent. The concerns we had from our perspective wasn't just the chalk. We didn't want to have a chalk and cheese scenario, because the sheer volume that they are guaranteed by remaining and attaining all of our local business was not comparable to the discount offered. If we recognize our relationship with the HSA, the prices that we achieve from the HSA in comparison to the charge master is a better discount than what was presented by the HCSI initial offer. And we have achieved subsequent offers with them regarding additional discounts on a cost volume profit basis.
Mr. Connolly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Reference has been made repeatedly to like initial offers. Does that mean that there were subsequent offers, or are there negotiations in the process? Because it's the whole argument, Mr. Chairman, seems to be a bit tautological in considering the colossal amount of waivers that were given to Health City and the charges that we're now hearing about. Is there a disconnect, or am I not getting it correct?
You get it correct.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The concern that we've had was, we really aren't, from the comparison or from our perspective, Mrs. O'Connor-Conley, had we presented an RFP for the exclusivity of all of our cardiovascular care to either a U.S. facility or even a local facility, we would expect a much better discount. Or it's kind of an unwritten rule that all Cineco, or we are required to solicit the HSA for primary care and any care that they can provide, failing which we then solicit the local market. So they fall, the Health City Cayman has fallen into a kind of a destination default where we will send our people there and our members there, and we are utilizing their services. However, for the exclusivity for which they have proposed to us to cover 95% of our cardiothoracic procedures, etc., that exclusivity has the potential to be, from a monetary perspective, between $7 and $9.5 million per year just for the civil servants alone. So for a contract of that magnitude, we would expect in normal negotiations, if this was an overseas facility, we would expect a much better discount, having almost a guaranteed payment or access to those funds.
Mr.
Mr. McLean? You had a follow-up?
Yes, Mr.
Sorry.
Chair, thanks for giving way, Mr. McLean. Perhaps then we could get an undertaking for a composition of relevant persons from Cineco and their government to sit down to try to negotiate a more favorable thing. Otherwise, it would have been an exercise in futility. And I mean, I certainly know the proprietors fairly well, as would be the present government. And I think that it would be in their interest for sustainability to make sure that, it's a quid pro quo situation here in Cayman, because as I understand it now, I think it seems somewhat imbalanced, and that would be most unfortunate if it remained that way.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chairman, I am glad to say to you, sir, that I'm going in a different direction now.
But I have some supplementary based on this, if you could change it.
You wanted to go before Mr. Miller? Mr. McLean? Okay.
One clarification from Mr. Tibbetts. You say that the original prices presented to you did not include the 20% reduction that is mandated and agreed under the MOU for any Caymanian referred from the HSA, who you would be covering? You had to ask for that 20%?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
It is mandated.
No, sir. It was initially presented, their charge master, which is, I think you have access to and have seen, and the proposal to that charge master was 20%.
But the question I'm asking is so they presented to you the figures that are on the internet for the rest of the world.
Yes, sir.
And the MOU that they signed required that they were given Caymanians referred by the HSA, who the only people you're going to cover, 20%. And you saying that they came to you with an original proposal with prices that didn't include that?
No, sir. They came to me with through you, Mr. Chair, sorry. They came to me, sir,
Worldwide prices?
with 20%. That has been the original offer from the beginning. Yes, sir. They have, during our subsequent negotiations, they have returned to us with a subsequent offer at the same 20% level, but a cost volume basis, or a volume basis discount in the form of credits, not actual discounts.
But that's no cheaper price. That's a gimmick to get more business. That's not going to cost you any less in the long run. Well, it might per item, but that's the negotiating tool to get more volume. Anyway,
Through you, Mr. Chair, and we have subsequently rejected that offer, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to ask the gentleman there, I would like to ask the gentleman, Mr. Tibbetts, what is he cynical limited to for insurance? Whether it's age group, salary amounts to insure.
Through you, Mr. Chair. If I may, I think your question related to the standard health insurance contract and the policy to which we sell to the public.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Currently, we do not have any limitations. Any person of any age that walks into Cineco and presents themselves to acquire insurance under the law and under our initial charter, we will sell them a policy. Under the current law, sir, the health insurance law, the revision 2013, requires a move away from an underwriting aspect, so to speak, to what's the opposite to that in form of a risk rating. We traditionally offered 3 insurance subsets of the same plan. The standard health insurance contract was divided into 3 capacities. This is for the public. This is not the civil servant plan, not the indigent plan, etc. The standard health insurance contract prior to 2013 was offered under 3 sets. First being the affordable group for persons with income under 40,000 CI per year. The challenger group for persons that were refused coverage from another insurance company, and the silver group for any person of 60 years of age or older.
So you can't offer insurance where anyone making an income over 40,000.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Under that methodology, it was not a prohibitive component by law. It was a kind of a policy perspective not to compete with the open market or the other insurance companies.
And where did that policy come from?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Sir, I have yet to read it. I was just told when I got there that was the process that was established, and that was the eligibility requirements on an application.
Mr. Chairman, you have responsibility here. I would ask that you look into that seriously, sir, because Cineco, being a full-fledged insurance with all your assets being your liquidity assets being the same as the competitors, I beg you, sir, you look into that one for us, you see, because the more of them big people we can get, the less government got to pay, because you can balance her out there. And the next one, Mr. Chairman, I think for you, that I would ask that you look into, sir, for us, is why is it Cineco can't cover the full ambit of insurances? That is house, car, property, life. I think those are the ones that we put on people. Because, Mr. Chairman, that may very well lead in the direction of a national insurance so that we all may benefit under one umbrella. And I'm only asking that, Mr. Chairman, you know, I don't even know how to go pay my insurance, much less. I'm just asking that you look at that in its entirety. I wonder what is done with the, Mr. Chairman, through you, sir. The Seneco, being a full insurance, health insurance carrier, you are allowed to, where you take $15 and $20 out of,
Copay.
no, for the indigent.
Oh, yes.
Segregated
They segregated
insurance
funds.
fund.
What do you do with that? Do you collect that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The segregated SIF, as a traditional segregated insurance fees, is a component that is attached to every health insurance policy in the country. The funds are collected from the different Class A insurance companies that provide health policies, and that is remitted to the Department of Health and Regulatory Services, the Health Insurance Commissioner, Mr. Mervyn Connolly.
And what do you remit?
Those funds, through you, Mr. Chair, those funds are not remitted to Seneco. Those funds are, it is my understanding, is placed into the general revenue and somewhat indirectly relate to the cost, and it's specifically identified in the law to manage.
No,
the
I ain't asking you about what they do with it or what they. That's not your business. That's that man their business.
Yes, sir.
The financial secretary. I'm asking you, do you collect?
Or do we remit?
Collect and remit.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, sir, we do. Yes, sir, we do. On every policy that we sell, we collect that taxes or that fee, and we also remit that to the Health Insurance Commissioner on a monthly basis.
Okay, and we know what we do with it. We pay you then back for the indigent. That's all we do.
True.
For all them indigents you got on the insurance. We understand that one. Okay. Because if you keeping it and want to keep it, then we got to change the law, because all insurances are mandated by statute to remit to the financial secretary through the Health Insurance Commission, which goes back to government. Same brother, different door. Mr. Chairman, if I can ask Mr. Tibbetts, what is your minimum that you are protected through? At what level do you start reinsurance?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Seneco acquires reinsurance on our civil servants and civil servant pensioners plan. That's the only plan to which we acquire reinsurance at this time. We have just completed our RFP, and the trigger point on that is $700,000 for US. We have now modified that reinsurance RFP to now provide that coverage for both local costs as well as overseas costs. Traditionally, we did not have it covering local costs because we weren't at an elevated or propensity to achieve a 700,000 event would only require tertiary care, and the tertiary care available locally, our capacity to achieve that in any case was very limited. With the Sheddy Hospital arriving, or the health city Cayman Islands, we now have the capacity for that level of tertiary care. Therefore, we had to modify our reinsurance.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, can you explain civil servants and who else?
Civil servants and civil servant pensioners. Those are the only individuals. From our business model, it's the 30100 group.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, our risk lies elsewhere. The majority of our risk lies elsewhere in those that we are insuring. Indigents, people over 60, what have you and what have you. Mr. Chairman, I again place upon your broad shoulders or narrow shoulders, whichever they are, they got plenty of weight now, that you look into that one for us too. Because that's where we're getting the most of our catastrophic illnesses, isn't it? A lot of it. And we need to start insuring that sector, sir.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The indigent population has very unique characteristics to it to a certain extent. The Health Insurance Commission and ourselves, as well as with our minister, are now examining what we consider a type of medical indigent instant or incident issue. The indigent population currently stands at around, I think it's 1,200 persons was the last count, yes. Of that, statistically, we have run an analysis on those persons, and about 900 of them are permanent basis, meaning they have a predictive value whereby a market for reinsurance has a palatability to acquire or to bind a contract for that group. The other 300 of that group are usually what we consider transient indigent or medically indigent. And they are a culmination of individuals with a health insurance policy that has exceeded its limits, or they do not have any health insurance at all. And sometimes we've seen individuals entered into that group based on the Department of Health Regulatory or the Department of Children and Family Services addition to the indigent eligibility file, or adding them to the indigent list for items such as a co-pay or a co-insurance. So the challenge that we have, and I'd like to again reference a planned retreat regarding this, is to see if we can essentially split the indigent population into two. Those that are permanent, that will be there, then examining a long-term cost, care, plan, chronic management, as well as the probability of attaining reinsurance. In examining the market, the fact that and maybe I'll give it to you from a different perspective. The 900 persons that are in that indigent fund, in our analysis, accumulate costs worthy of 56% of the entire fund. The remaining 44% of the fund are those that are transient, that come in for a period 3 months to 6 months and then move out. And they're usually catastrophic cases, which is usually what costs us the most.
And Mr. Chairman, having said all that, the final analysis is we need to look at reinsurance.
Through you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair. Yes, Mr. McLean, you are correct. The only challenge I just wanted to be cognizant of, reinsurers, and we have tested the water with them to see how palatable that group is. The challenge they have is the unpredictability, to say just because you deem someone indigent, we must cover their reinsurance. For a neonatal case that could be $2 million in cost for a premature birth, a reinsurer not having that person in that plan on a scheduled care and maintenance and chronic illness management would feel somewhat hesitant. Reinsurance market is always out there to a certain extent, but what we would pay for it would be significantly a lot, probably more than what we would pay for the actual cost of it, until we dissect it, split it into what's considered a predictable group with characteristics that is then truly insurable. But yes, reinsurance is a viable option.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Miller.
One final question on your reinsurance that you currently have is on a per episode or incident versus, and not on a cumulative claims of your groups, right?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Sort of both, actually. If a member is involved in an incident or it has a medical interaction, once the treatment starts, it really has changed now. Under the other model, once they were referred overseas, essentially the clock started ticking to a certain extent. once the bills accumulated to a certain value, we would trigger them into an examination protocol, and then if it didn't trigger the actual attachment tier per the policy, then they would be very much involved, audit, they would examine, because it's in their best interest to keep the cost down and ensure the treatment is correct. With the new treaty that we've now signed, and we've just completed the RFP, or subject to approval from CTC, we're waiting on the results of it. We will now move to a modality where the first dollar, depending on the diagnosis locally. So a person could incur, $50,000 or $60,000 locally prior to being sent overseas. Then, possibly amass another $650,000. They would now be within the actual the attachment point. At that point, then the reinsurers would be involved, and it is. We're very pleased to say that in our negotiations, sir, we actually we've paid less for more in this completed RFP. And it's in due in part to how we restructured the organization. Our contracts with United Healthcare, our planned contracting and use of Ascension facilities overseas has, once we presented our contracts and all of our information to the reinsurers, we did receive a very favorable bid on two very large organizations. And we actually presented the Health City scenario to them as well. And we achieved a very good price going forward for the next 3 years.
Mr. Miller?
Yeah, currently you utilize or are involved with a benefit verification system that I believe is operated by a company called Advanced Integrated Systems, or AIS, something like that. How did that come about? But tell me how it came about first, and then we'll get to the cost.
Through you, Mr. Chair. In September 30th, 2010, Seneco and the CIHSA published a joint RFP proposal at the CTC number 10-11/HSA/2014. The actual name of the published RFP was a National Health Insurance Electronic Verification and Adjudication System. And the RFP was opened on September 30th and closed on November 5th. The final decision was made on December 6, 2010. The CTC ratified or accepted the proposal, and the joint acquisition occurred, in which Seneco and the HSA acquired the system, paid for the implementation of the system, and it was deployed at the CIHSA for the purposes as the RFP described.
What was the cost of the original cost, both from Seneco and the HSA, if you know what the HSA, or was it divided equally? And having bought the license, or is there an ongoing charge per transaction? And what is that, whether that's a percentage or not?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The system was initially acquired for, there is a mobilization fee of $2.4 million. Yes, the Ministry of Health actually acquired this, and it was 1.2 was the initial mobilization fee, paid 50-50 between Seneco and I believe the HSA, or paid for by the ministry for both Seneco and the HSA.
So it was a total of 3.6? 2.4 paid for by the ministry, and then 1.2 for Cineco, or that's the same 2.4?
That's the same 2.4. Through you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, sorry. That's the same 2.4.
Okay. What is is there an ongoing licensing charge, or once we paid this, we don't pay them anymore?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The adjudication system works on the premise that claims that are positively adjudicated through the system requires a remittance fee of 2.5% on each claim.
Wow.
Of that 2.5%, Cineco is responsible for 1% and the CIHSA is responsible for 1.5%. My apologies. It's, I believe it's, and I have the contract here, let me just double check. It's actually 4%, sir. 2.5 is, yes, sir. 2.5 is the responsibility of the CIHSA and 1.5 is the responsibility of Cineco.
Mr. Tibbetts,
Sorry, Mr.
may I have a copy of that contract, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Is there a local company that has a local business license that this money is paid to?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there is a local company that we remit each month to. It's registered as AIS Cayman Limited, I believe.
Well, I have done a search of the company records, and I can't find a company called Advanced Integrated Systems Cayman Limited. I understand that, I don't have the piece of paper here, but I understand that there may be a business license. Whether it's, I'm not certain because I haven't had an opportunity to go to the Department of Commerce personally, but I understand that there may be a business license trading as, and which the person that reported to me was given an address of some condominiums behind Thorn Circle called Le Ambiance, I believe.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The actual contract is listed as Advanced Integrated Systems Cayman Limited.
Advanced Integrated.
Mr. Chairman, can we get the address of that company, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We do not have the actual address listed on the only document I brought today was the contract, but I will source the actual address presented on the monthly invoice.
Does the contract state where notices should be sent?
The legal contract.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, sir, it does.
Bank account.
Where? What's that?
That's why they're looking.
My apologies, Mr. Chair. Yes, sir. It says here, notice to be directed to number, my apologies. Yes, sir. It says, notice directed to AIS, Mr. Douglas Halsall, Director, Advanced Integrated Systems, Cayman Limited, 37 Fairbanks Road, P.O. Box 669, Georgetown, KY 11109.
Douglas who?
Mr. Douglas Halsall.
Halsall.
Yes, sir. There's a second address, again, to Mr. Douglas Halsall, Chief Executive Officer of Health Adjudication Systems, 20 McCoud Street, Castries, St. Lucia.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if what's his name? Mr. Tibbetts can tell us that Fairbanks Road, is that a commercial address or an apartment?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I do not know, Mr. Member.
Okay, well, Mr. Chairman, we need to investigate that, see what that is, if that's an apartment or a commercial address, because Fairbanks only has the prison on it as a commercial place, a business, institution, and the rest of them are residential homes, i.e. single-family homes or multi-family homes in the form of apartments. And no one in this country should be doing business from an apartment. You can, but not of this nature dealing with government. That's extremely transient.
Mr. O'Connor, before you, Mr. Eden, you've been waiting for a while to ask a question, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate Honorable Speaker for holding on. This goes back to when you were talking about the number or age of people insured by Cineco. In the last few months, I know that my Bodntown colleagues and I have been working on different youngsters, and in information that we gathered, I assume that Cineco wouldn't insure these. One of them, it was 3, the other one was 4 or 5. If Mr. Tibbetts would expound a bit on that age, minimum age.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The minimum age to actually sign a contractual agreement is based on, I think, the national age of 18 years old, which would deem the consensual age. That is the age to which we will accept an individual policy. However, any child presented to us as a dependent on an existing adult's policy is accepted.
This is a continuation. In the instance I'm talking about, I think some of these have been assisted through DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services. How does that operate?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Cineco provides administrative services to 2, or actually 3 separate lines of health insurance. We essentially just manage the cost and the care. The first is the indigent. The second are the seafarers and veterans overseas. The third are the advance loan applicants through the Ministry of Finance. The indigent application or the indigent population of our group of members are determined by an application to the Department of Children and Family Services. Upon complete vetting or assessment, the person is then deemed as indigent and viable for the coverage or the assistance, whether it be a monetary value or other cost of living, and possibly for health insurance, or health coverage. Once the person is registered or accepted by the Department of Children and Family Services, their name is added to the list and communicated to the Department of Health and Regulatory Services via the Health Insurance Commissioner, Mr. Mervyn Connolly, who then adds that person formally via an authorization protocol to the existing list. We at that time become notified that we will now cover and present coverage for this individual. We will then perform our normal administrative duties in the issuance of a card to the social worker to be distributed, as well as any other services they require, including the coordination of air ambulance, the assumption of health insurance costs, or health costs above their existing health insurance coverage in some scenarios, as well as the coverage of co-pay and co-insurance for some events. But they essentially, we begin to manage and look after them as if they are a member at that point. But we do not determine who gets added to that list. We do assist in determining the extension of certain coverages for complexity, for certain diagnoses, whereby from a traditional risk rating process, we recognize this person would not be able to afford a health insurance program on the open market. Therefore, in our assessment of their health risk, they should remain on indigent permanently. And we are working with the minister to develop a defined protocol for such programs definitively. However, to a certain extent, it's been on an ad hoc and one-on-one basis. Regards to the seafarers, the second set, that is done by the particular associations who then make representations to, I believe, was traditionally the Minister of Health, and now I believe the Ministry of Finance manages the seafarers and veterans, who at that point add them to the list, and once we're notified that a person has been added to the list, we then perform again the usual administrative services in printing the card, creating a membership profile, etc., and we begin to manage their care as well. And the third and final would be the advance loan person who applies to the Ministry of Finance for an advance loan for a medical care or event, usually in a catastrophic event. Once we're notified by the Ministry of Finance that the agreements have been put in place, we will then perform all the management, guarantee all of the care, etc. And once we receive the bills, we then remit to the Ministry of Finance for honoring.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tibbetts. And through you, Mr. Chairman, just to comment and say that as I've listened to Mr. Tibbetts this morning, I've become very impressed of his understanding and knowledge of the subject matter he's talking about, and it was really impressive how he has handled this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eden, Mr. Connolly, and then Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. I wonder whether Mr. Tibbetts could say whether children are considered dependents up to age 18. In particular, I'm trying to seek an elucidation on that gap where children leave school, say 16, but choose not to go into tertiary education. Who would cover that group of children?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, ma'am. The current law recognizes what's now called the dependent offspring. Under the provisions of the civil service law, in children above the age, a dependent child can only be covered up to 18. However, if you provide proof that the child is in tertiary education, and again, this is a policy perspective, they can remain between 18 and 23 years of age, provided they are in full-time tertiary education or enrollment. Under all other insurance contracts per the law, the provision of the law now requires that the same insurance that you currently have, and as the child is under you as a dependent, provide you an opportunity to retain that child under three facets of the law. One being retain the child above 18 to the age of 30, and who pays for that coverage, it depends on your employment contract and the provision of the plan to which you are subscribed. However, there are three tests that must be met, and this was described under the law as a dependent offspring. The child has to reside with you, be financially dependent of you, and I believe the final is that they are financially dependent on you and reside financially, yes. And I think they are not employed. That was the final third one. Unemployed, yes, sir.
The other question, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Tibbetts, is the contract that you were previously speaking to. I would take it that you are a senior member of management, would have been present at the signing of the contract. The party that you signed with, was it an attorney signing on behalf of the party, or did you actually meet the individual, and finally did you get a certificate? Do you have on file a certificate of good standing?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I originally joined Cineco on December 10, 2010. The RFP that was issued had completed, I think, probably the majority of its progression. The committee that was utilized to select was consisted of individuals from the HSA and I think Cineco's sole representative at the time was the former general manager of Cineco. The recommendations had reached the CTC, the Central Tenders Committee, who had accepted the recommendations on December 6th. When I joined Cineco on December 10th, it had already concluded, a decision was made. I met with the individuals at the CIHSA on December 21st and executed the document as the Chief Executive Officer of Cineco, along with the Chairman of the Board of Cineco, the Acting Chief Executive Officer of the HSA, Dr. Greg Hoeksema, and the Chairman of the Board of the HSA, Mr. Canova Watson. Our chairman at the time was Mr. Scott Cummings, Chairman of the Board of Cineco, Mr. Scott Cummings. That's when I executed the contract. I personally did not partake in the selection committee or the assessment of the actual system to make the final decision, Mr. Chairman.
Can I then ask, and what is the duration of the contract? Is there a exit clause within the contract?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The initial duration, in my understanding of the contract, was that the system was to be utilized for a period of 5 years upon successful deployment and installation. The contract was dated December 21st. In February of 2011, December 21st, 2010, in February of 2011, I think 12, was it 12? In 12? Yes, excuse one second. Yes, my apologies. Yes, the system was deployed in phases. The first successful implementation of the system was deployed for the management of dental claims, and that was essentially turned on or activated in February 2012. The medical component of the adjudication system, the largest and most robust, was turned on May 2012.
Mr. Chair, thanks for your indulgence. I'll ask this follow-up and give way to other members. Mr. Chair, through you to the Mr. Tibbetts, if the initial contract was concluded in 2010, what steps are being taken to renegotiate and or extend the contract, saying we have less than 6 months for the termination of the 5-year period you mentioned?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair. My apologies, Ms. Julie. The good standing requirement of as you requested certificate of good, this standing of certificate of good standing. My apologies. Is not a requirement of this contract, nor was I privy to seeing if any was assessed initially from the initial contracting.
That's understandable, Mr. Tibbetts, that it may not be a requirement of the contract, but I think it's one of the areas in which the government has lacked the necessary due diligence protocol for quite some time. And I am going to request of the Minister of Health that he ask the CEO of the hospital to come to Finance Committee. And when she is coming, I'm asking that she brings, I've already asked you for a copy of the contract.
Yes,
I would like a certificate of registration for this company, a certificate of good standing. I would like the register of members, register of directors, and if there is a corporate entity acting as a member I would also like to have the register of members for that corporate entity. I want to find out who the ultimate beneficial owner of this company is, because from what I can comprehend, there is a lot of money being paid. We don't know who's being paid to, and it should have been known at the time the contract was signed. And for the sake of the record, I was distracted when you were mentioning these things. You said there was a $2.4 million mobilization.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, for the interruption, but on a matter of procedure, could we just make sure that the clerk is recording your request? Because it's a number of significant requests, and I don't really see the requisite recollection.
Thank you. You mentioned there was a $2.4 million mobilization fee. You mentioned there was a 4% transaction fee, 1.5 for Cynical, 2.5 for the HSA. What were the other financial details that you mentioned between those two? The 2.4 mobilization was the first, and then the transaction fee was the last. You mentioned some things in between that I was distracted by someone. Could you please repeat those for me?
True, you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Per the contract, Mr. Chairman, the actual, what's defined in the contract, actual setup for this was $1.372 million was the setup for the system at the HSA. And in the contract, you will see the breakdown of that. The contract had a what they consider a transaction fee of 1.5% that would be paid by Seneco as the carrier, and the HSA, the provider, at 2.5%.
Right. So that's a 2.4 mobilization, a 1.372 setup, and then the
Yes.
4% transaction fee. Split.
Let me, my apologies. I think the 2.4 was, and there's two pieces, and I'll explain. There was the schedule that I got was from, I think, from the HSA, and I believe that it had I think it added actually two pieces to this. So that's where that 2.4 came from. I am not sure exactly what that was for. However, per the contract, sir, it's only states, my apologies, in lieu of the 2.4, it says 1.372 as the setup fee. I'm trying to figure out what the difference was for.
Isn't there not a training and setup component that 1.37 represents in addition to 2.4?
Through
Because
you,
I
Mr.
think there were
Chair.
some payments for training of staff and installation, and I think the HSA has, about 25 or 30 stations where this can be done as opposed to one or two in the business office.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, there was of the 1.372, there was a 450,000 isolated charge for implementation services related to the system setup and training, one-time system setup charge, consultancy training, database and network setup, etc.
So those are the figures, 2.4, 1.372, and then the transaction fees.
Yeah, my apologies, sir. Maybe you can stand down on the 2.4, the 1.372, not the 2.4.
Okay.
I did receive a spreadsheet from the HSA that had that value, but that was not what was in the contract. I'm not certain what that was, sir, what
Okay.
those two were.
All right, fair enough.
Mr. Chairman, we might also need that spreadsheet that the HSA presented to him, which represents the 2.4 million.
Thank you. Mr. Bush, you had a question, sir?
On a different matter, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Tibbetts, he's talking to somebody else. Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Tibbetts. One of the reasons behind the setting up of Cineco was because a number of insurance companies were not accepting certain people and insuring certain people. The complaints we're getting is that some people still can't get insurance through Cineco. Are you getting requests that you are not able to fulfill? You can't take on people for whatever reason. Are you finding that there are many people that are applying but can't get insurance through Cineco?
True, you, Mr. Chair. The challenge that we're having, Mr. Bush, is that once the law changed from the underwriting component to what's called the risk rating, an individual that was traditionally excluded from coverage from another insurance company would come to us and solicit us for what we consider the challenger plan. So they had a refusal essentially. With the new law, there is no provision to refuse a person on the standard health insurance contract. On a group plan, yes, but on a standard health insurance contract, no insurance company is permitted to refuse anyone anymore. What they do as an alternative is to say the base premium may be $167, but based on your risk, you're now $1,200 a month. That, sir, has what we consider a pricing discrimination to it, but not an actual refusal. So we, Cineco, are no different with that challenge. So some of the individuals that are getting priced at a very high level will come to us, and we will also score them. Now, we are cognizant, being the insurer of last resort, that we try to maintain our prices that can accommodate some of these individuals. But the challenge is, sir, that we are getting only those persons. So essentially, if I am only getting high risk, and I'm not balancing that off with an equal pool to kind of subsidize the high-risk persons, my cost or losses and claims are going to be exponential as compared to another insurance company that has a more balanced pool and a balanced business. So there is no methodology at our offices, sir, to refuse anyone coverage. The challenge is once we risk rate them and the rate comes back saying, based on your risk and what's happening, you're this. Hence, we've done some proposals to the minister to try to produce a premium assistance program for some of these individuals, or what we consider truly uninsurable risk, and put together a national plan to accommodate them in one specified pool. That is the only time, sir, that an interaction with Cineco during an application of a health insurance plan, that a person can perceive that we're turning them away, but it's not for refusal of coverage. It's only based on the pricing of the risk rating, which is what we are required to perform by law.
The price came out so high that you couldn't take them on, more or less. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
And so you're trying to find a way now to be able to get coverage for those type of people.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Traditionally, what would happen, Mr. Bush, was that they would then seek assistance from the Department of Children and Family Services, indigent, and it goes right back. And what we found, sir, individuals in high earning brackets have had, medical events, and based on that, for example, cancer. Once a person has had an episode of cancer and they've successfully been treated, the propensity to redevelop and to have a future is at an elevated risk compared to an ordinary person. So they will usually be risk rated very highly. And these individuals are of all walks of society. What we're finding is that by the risk rating, we're producing a scenario where they can't afford to buy it irrespective of their income. So they walk uninsured essentially, which is never the goal or the aim of either the law nor the policy, the impetus of Cineco.
So you do the rating?
Yes, sir.
Cineco, when I say you, meaning Cineco?
Through you, yes, sir. Through you, Mr. Chair. We work with an actuary determining on a risk basis and a risk matrix. The standard health insurance law gives us, I think it's 9 specific diagnoses that we can inquire of a person in regards to any health challenges or historical health claims, as well as we can also examine if they were an existing member with Seneco, their claims history. Based on that, we score and we abide by the law, what the risk rating says. If that person yields a risk rating that's over 200% of the base rate approved by the Health Insurance Commission of $167, that application then is sent to the Health Insurance Commissioner for authorization to charge over 200% and up to 400% per his specific authorization. And that's a requirement of the Health Insurance Law 2013 revision, that the Health Insurance Commissioner must explicitly approve in a risk rating of 200% or more of the base rate of 167.
But as you said before, you are now moving in a direction to try to deal with these types of clients.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we are. We've had very good talks with Minister Archer regarding what we see as a challenge, whereby instead of defaulting members to the indigent list, whereby the Cayman Islands government is covering them at 100%, these persons can actually buy a legitimate plan with a subsidized premium based on their risk and contribute to their health care cost as well. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Mr. Miller?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. There's an actual vote under the Ministry of Health for $2+ million, which is supposed to help people who don't have adequate health insurance. Could you not access that fund to assist with premiums, which would reduce the risk to government of having to cover 100%?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We certainly could, sir. We certainly could utilize that in a perspective that we described earlier. If an individual has insufficient or is risk rated to an elevated level, the funds could subsidize a premium. One of the significant features that changes has a real paradigm shift. If a person is acquiring an insurance plan and abiding by policies and processes, that then gives us the opportunity for reinsurance. But reinsurance is contrary to belief, is never free. You find yourself in an episode of care that you certainly win at sometimes and sometimes you lose in it. It's insuring insurance. So, but having a person under an insurance plan there's significant benefits to that. They recognize if they don't need funds, they're insured to a certain extent to go and get care. Keeping routine care and monitoring helps mitigate catastrophic cases, mitigate someone going into a chronic illness situation, and offset the opportunities for large claim incidents based on not regular and routine care or monitoring of one's health.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, and bear with me a little bit because I need to give a little background information. I want to consider some. In 1991, when I went through this process of introducing national health insurance, which unfortunately was repealed by the 92 to 96 government, and the country has been bleeding ever since. But the actuaries that I employed at the time, Towers Perrin, which was the biggest actuarial firm in the world, came up with a very unique way to manage, to a certain extent, the risk because of our demographics and the size of our thing. What they recommended at the time was that the private insurance companies, which would also include Seneco now, for every premium collected, they deposited 10% of that premium in a reinsurance fund, which they themselves managed with proper published audited accounts on an annual basis. But if you look at the 2012 SEMA report, based on their statistics for health insurance, we would be looking right in that year of a $17 million as opposed to the $5 million that we were collecting under this ridiculous formula that they won't insure somebody who's high risk, but they will pay government $10 per contract, which goes into some indigent fund, which the government has to take out of the treasury to update, because that only produces in the region of or 60% of what's needed. So that not even that is regulated or calculated on the basis of what the actual cost of indigence is. It is just a number that they allow the insurance companies themselves to set. I wonder if the government would consider once again looking at setting up that kind of a risk pool. In other words, if an insurance company got hit with a catastrophic case, they would go to their peers and get assistance from that pool, which is created locally, to help pay that claim so that we could help keep the rates down.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is one of many viable alternatives, Mr. Miller, that that has, you know, correct. It has a palatability to it. One of the other alternatives that we've looked at and we've presented our perspective on that, one of the concerns that we at Seneco recognize is that having almost a direct line or access to persons that have health challenges or have a history of claims, and being the exclusive provider of care for those persons or the only ones that are willing to accept them, we find ourselves, like I described earlier, just exclusively having a large health risk pool. And one of the alternatives to that, now that we have a national risk rating matrix defined by law, is the use of what you would consider a risk-averse fund. So a health insurance company that has essentially cleaned all of their health risk out of their group plans, sent them to Seneco to a certain extent, based on their premium, there would be a contribution percentage. So depending on their propensity to take risk, they would then contribute less to the pool. Essentially, what is going, by pure essence and definition, our healthcare cost is going to be the same irrespective of if we insure it or we don't. So having recognized that the way to mitigate that is to a certain extent diminish the profitability of those that mitigate all of the risk yet hold the same line on the premium. But it would require not only a legislation, but it would require a complement of resources to the Health Insurance Commissioner to ensure that his team and his staff is there to facilitate the management and monitoring to mitigate this risk-averse behavior of some of the other Class A insurers. But we also have to be cognizant that Class A insurers are also a business, and they're in the business of making profit and returning an investment to their shareholders. So trying to manage and balance that will always, as we can appreciate, present an opportunity whereby if you can move something that's going to defer your income or increase your expenses away from your risk, it's prudent for them to accept that or move in that. We're not saying this is not of a moral or ethical decision. It's a business-based decision, and it has to be examined from that perspective. So legislation has to really examine how we go about mitigating as the term has been traditionally utilized, the cherry picking to a certain extent.
Mr. Bush, did you have a question? If there are no questions, no further.
Mr. I have some additional questions on this Cayman Integrated Systems or Cayman Integrated Systems, Cayman Limited, whichever it turns out to be, but I'll wait until we're coming back to that later.
Yes, sir. I've
Okay,
requested those documents be brought to the House. It's a convenient time for us to take the lunch break, so we'll do that at this time.
Need a jet.